Welcome to this month's Schuman Talk, in which we look at issues facing us in Europe today in the light of Robert Schuman's vision for Europe as a community of peoples deeply rooted in Christian values. You see, it was on May the 9th in 1950 at 6 p.m. that the French Foreign Minister, Robert Schuman, gave a 3-minute speech in which he laid the foundation for the European house where today 450 million Europeans live together in peace. I call this the defining moment of post-war Europe, for it launched the European movement for peace and unity that's led to today's European Union. This is why we send out these Schuman Talks on the 9th day of each month at 6 p.m. to remember this declaration. And as I said, Schuman's vision for Europe was of a community of peoples deeply rooted in basic Christian values. And it embraced the peoples of Central and Eastern Europe as well, at that stage still under communist domination. Now, our guest this month is Dr. Taras Dzyubanskyy, and he's an advisor for the religious and ecumenical issues to the mayor of Lviv. He is founder of the interfaith center Libertas, which is the first of its kind in Ukraine. And he lives in Rome, where he is a religious liberty fellow with the Acton Institute. Now, Taras is a native of Lviv, and I happen to be in Lviv as you listen to us tonight, but he happens to be in Rome. So I am presently on a 10-day visit, visiting various youth with mission centers and other connections there in Ukraine. So I want to say welcome, Dr. Dzyubanskyy. I'm going to call you Taras, Professor. It's a great pleasure to have you with us tonight.
Thank you so much, Jeff. It's an honor to be hosted by you at the Schuman Center Talk, and welcome to Ukraine. You know, I'm sure Ukrainians are always inspired by people who come and visit our country, especially when there is war, when there is conflict, because this shows the sign that we are not alone. This shows the sign of solidarity. And I think having such a talk devoted to Ukraine is a sign of solidarity, you know, and it's important for us. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you. Yes, and what we're beginning to recognize is that the way Ukrainians have been responding to the aggression of Russia, and under extreme circumstances these last 4 years, Ukraine are living out certain values that Europe often gives lip service to, but we have not known the kind of pressure that Ukraine is under right now. And we would not, it would be very questionable if Europeans generally would be able to exhibit the same kind of character values and moral values that the Ukrainians have now. So I want to talk to you now about what we Europeans could be learning from Ukrainians. But before we get started on that, tell us about Lviv, your home city, which historically was a crossroads of various cultures, including Ukrainian, of course, and Polish, Armenian, and Jewish populations. It's been under different regimes through the centuries. And in fact, I just discovered that Lviv and Amsterdam got started around the same time in the 13th century. We have just been celebrating 750 years here in Amsterdam this last year. And Lviv was almost exactly the same age. So, yeah, tell us about Lviv.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. So Lviv is from the 13th century. The exact date of the establishment is 1256. It was established by the ruler called Danilo, and he named the city for his son Leo. That's why Lviv, or Leopoli, right, the city of Leo. And one of the symbols of the city is actually a lion. Of course, naturally, we don't have any lions unless you go to the zoo or a circus in the past. But lion is one of the symbols of our city, and we are very proud of it. You know, we are proud of the city. The city, as you said, it lies on the crossroads between different cultures. We had a big Armenian, Jewish, Polish, Russian, and of course Ukrainian, and even Tatar population because in Lviv we have a street called Tatarska, which is named after the Tatars, the Crimean Tatars, who are indigenous people to Crimea. So in Lviv we always had this diversity, which I believe always contributed to the richness, cultural richness, but also we see a religion as part of our culture. And I always like to remind people that John Paul II, who is one of my heroes, he once said that a religion should be culture, because if religion does not become culture, we have to question its authenticity. So religion and culture, they go hand in hand together. And again, Lviv was this cradle of culture, spirituality, religion. In fact, in Lviv today, we have more than 100 churches of different denomination. Now we have Orthodox, Greek Catholic, you have Roman Catholic, you have different Protestant ecclesial communities. So it's always, a center, a synthesis of Western and sort of Eastern worlds coming together. And I'm very proud to be from that city.
Now, for those who have difficulty seeing where Lviv is on the map, let's just look there and we see it's really right over on the western side, very close to the Polish border, or relatively close to the Polish border. It has also experienced attacks, although it was furthest away from Russia. It has had direct attacks from Putin's rockets. And explain how that this is, it's not always been part of Ukraine.
Yes, so Lviv has been under different regimes, right? I mean, Lviv has been under the Polish regime. So Polish people sometimes jokingly say, well, Lviv is a Polish city, right? Russians say, well, Lvov, it's what was under Russia. Also, it was under Austrian-Hungarian Empire. So that's why it has the number Lemberg, right? So Lvov, Lviv, Lemberg, all these names, they also tell you about all these kinds of moments or periods of history where Lviv was under different empires. And that's why, again, being under those empires, definitely you can see the influence. For example, walking in the downtown city, you see different types of architecture, right? I mean, you have the beautiful Austro-Hungarian grandiose structures. You have the ugly Soviet buildings as well. And you see that contrast, right? Especially if you move outside of the city center, you start seeing still all these Soviet buildings. So yes, all of these elements or historical periods, they definitely contributed to the identity of the Ukrainians who live in Lviv.
Well, we have a couple of photos of the city that we can put on the screen so people can see the architecture. I suppose it's a Baroque style architecture particularly, and perhaps reflects the Polish time period. Would that be correct to say?
Yes, and actually what you see is the towers of the Roman Catholic Cathedral, which is right directly downtown on the Ratusha Square, right? So it's right in the middle of the town. Then you see the church there to the left, then another little dome, and then behind you see a slope, right? So I mean, there are a couple of hills there. People always like to say that our city was founded on the hills, like the 7 hills of Rome. A lot of it is legendary, but there has some truth to that as well.
Yeah. And let's see this other photo that has, it's actually taken from one of the highest towers in the city, right?
Right, yeah, it's from the square, from the main square, the Lviv City Council. And again, you see the back of the Latin Cathedral there, and there's many parks there in the city. And I'm feeling very nostalgic now about Lviv.
Yes.
Being,
Well, let's switch to our main topic, and that's what can Europeans be learning from Ukrainians as Ukrainians continue to defend their territory, their sovereignty, and their freedom in the face of Russia's invasion. Really, I think the struggles revealed not only military courage, but moral, civic, and cultural resilience. And I think that in the light of the fact that in recent decades, many European societies have experienced increasing social fragmentation, declining trust in institutions, a loss of shared moral reference points. What can we learn from Ukraine at this stage?
I think before I answer that question, I would like to say what Ukrainians learned themselves, from this kind of tragic experience at the moment. because we got our freedom or independence more than 30 years ago in 1990s, and thanks God, we got it without fighting. Nobody shed any blood at that time. Although century before, decades before, there was a lot of blood and tears and sweat shed. During communism, especially when Russia tried to erase our cultural identity. But in 1991, we got our independence. The Soviet Union collapsed. So in a way, we got it. How would I say it? We took it for granted. We are free now, and freedom, it connotes responsibility, right? I mean, I work for Acton Institute, and it's named after Lord Acton, who was a famous English historian. And Lord Acton once said that liberty or freedom, it's a delicate fruit of a mature civilization. So actually, freedom it's something delicate. It's something that needs to be cultivated. It's something that needs to be sustained. So when we got it, we took it for granted. We lived, there was a lot of transformation in Ukraine since 1991. If you compare Ukraine now and Ukraine, even now during the war, and to what Ukraine was 30 years ago, there is a huge difference in terms of, infrastructure, in terms of people's mentality. But again, freedom was taken for granted. And again, we never thought that we would be invaded in such a terrible manner as it happened, in 2022, full-scale invasion by Russia. So again, what Ukrainians learned, that freedom is not something to be taken for granted. What the war helped us understand that, now we need to rediscover our identity as a nation. And unfortunately, thanks to the war, this is what we are seeing in Ukraine. But fortunately, this is happening, right? Because a lot of people are now conscious that, we are not Russians. We might have Russians living in Ukraine, right? But I mean, we might have speakers who speak Russian, just like, many, many people in the east of Ukraine. But still, there is something unique about our identity. And this national identity can be inclusive, right? We can include not only Ukrainians, we have Tatars, we have Jews, we have different nationalities living in Ukraine. So the lesson is learned in a hard way now, that freedom has a price. And as we see it, Ukrainians are willing to pay the price. We have a lot of people who already died for the country, and they died for the ideal. They died for liberty, for freedom. And I think this is one of the lessons that Europeans can be inspired, hopefully, from, that, they're fighting for their freedom. So freedom is important. I mean, without freedom, you can't really have a free nation, right? I mean, it goes without saying, but freedom is one of the most fundamental human rights that we have.
Now, for the average Ukrainian, of course, anybody under the age of 35, say, doesn't have memory of the old communist days. Yet, how conscious are they of what it's like to live without freedom?
Mm-hmm. I think young people, especially like if you talk to teenagers, they probably wouldn't be very conscious of that unless they heard stories, from their grandparents or their parents who would talk to them about these times. I was a young kid when we didn't have freedom, when we still were under communism, and I remember those days, especially in before 1990s. We were in a very poor conditions, right? I mean, we lacked everything. There was poverty and no freedom to exercise religion, because, as you know, for communism, religion was the opium, was the drug for the people. So unless you were aligned with the state, you were not permitted to exercise religious freedom. So young people today, they wouldn't be much conscious of that. But again, unless they talk to their to older generations or watch movies, but they didn't live through that period. So for them, it's hard to imagine, just like for Europeans. Europe has been experiencing freedom for decades, right? For decades. So if you talk about freedom to them, it might be something, I don't know, it's taken for granted, definitely, right? But we have to understand that freedom has a price, and it needs to be continuously cultivated, because if it's not, there's always a danger that either the state or somebody else who has power, that they can limit your freedom, they can take it away, and then it becomes a problem.
Well, the loss of freedom is something that more Ukrainians would be aware of. Anybody over 35 Whereas here in Holland, I'm 76 and I don't have any memory firsthand of the Second World War. Uh, my father had a lot of stories to tell when he was uh, fighting with the New Zealand army in North Africa and Italy. But um, many Dutch people, the vast majority of the population, have no living memory of it. And so it would seem to me that this is a major lesson we need to learn from Ukrainians. Freedom is worth fighting for and can't be taken for granted. Um, and what can you tell us about the role of how important civil society is for freedom?
Well, definitely. I mean, what we have seen in Ukraine in the past few years, especially since the war erupted, and even before, during the Orange Revolution, then the Euromaidan, that civil society has so much power of mobilization. I mean, sometimes I talk to the people who are from the various ex-Soviet Union republics, and what always struck me before the full-scale invasion, that they told me, "Oh, guys, you're in Ukraine, you enjoy so much freedom, and there is democracy. You can have elections, and if elections are crooked, you can always go to the squares and you protest. And in our places, it's not like that. We have leaders who have been in power for 10, 15, 20 years, so they always sort of admired this resilient, I mean, this democratic spirit that Ukrainians have, and definitely part of that resilience is from the civil society. And I would also say that the civil society in Ukraine is not only secular society, but a lot of this mobilization and a lot of the spirit of democracy comes from the churches, from the religious communities. I myself, I belong to the Eastern Catholic Church. We are a minority. We are called Greek Catholic Church, but a lot of the things that were done in Ukraine to promote democracy, liberty, and freedom were done and started by religious organizations and by the churches. When we had the invasion that started, the first, of course, people who reacted were churches and monasteries in Kiev. They sheltered people, and so the churches, in a way, they became this oasis of safety and of freedom. And religion still plays an important part, for the religious society.
Yeah, yeah. In a lot of our Western European nations, society is becoming very polarized, fragmented. Civic engagement is weakening, and and yet, despite all the attempts to drive wedges into Ukrainian society, there seems to be a remarkable degree of togetherness. Or is that just a creation of the media? Or what's your assessment of how strong the sense of the national unity is, and desire, moral capital, we could call it?
Right. I would say it's pretty strong, although, fifth year of the war has started now. So the resilience, it cannot go on forever. I mean, people are very tired. Sometimes I hear in Europe, "Oh, we are tired of this war." And I'm thinking to myself, well, what should you say to Ukrainians who are under constant bombings, sirens, and alarms?
Yeah.
They're not only tired, they're exhausted. They're just, my wife is in Lviv now, and she tells me, we've been since power for many different periods, and it's difficult. We had minus 20 Celsius, so it's
Yes.
hard, it's difficult. People with families, but still life goes on, And now I'm not saying we got used to it, right? But we understand that what can you do in these circumstances? You need to continue fighting, and the morale, it's not as high as it was in the beginning, right? But we understand we cannot give up, because the liberty and freedom, it has a price, and if we are not willing to pay the price, we'll be enslaved. We go back to the old times, and of course nobody wants to do it, because people remember how it was before.
Well, tell us about that. I mean, minus 20 degrees. Very few of us in Western Europe experience those kind of temperatures, let alone uh, having all the electricity cut off, which means the water pumps don't work. And very often the pipes have burst, the sewage has burst. There's you can't just turn the taps on and see water come out. You've got to go and collect it in a bucket from somewhere. And if you live on the 13th floor of an apartment building, how have you witnessed how Ukrainians have responded to these extreme challenges.
Right. Myself, I have not seen it, but I hear a lot of stories, again, from the people who live either in Kiev or in the eastern side or in Sumy, which is very, very much bombarded these days. Now, they tell me that, yes, especially if you live on the upper floors of a higher apartment building, and especially if you're elderly or you are sick or you have people who are disabled, I mean, it's very, very difficult. It's so frustrating and it's exhausting. But thankfully, both the state and a lot of humanitarian organizations, together with the churches and religious communities, they organize these centers of resilience. They have tents outside of the buildings, of the apartment buildings, and they have generators who produce some power. So elderly people or anybody who wants to come there, they can come. They charge their phones. They get some food. They had some warmth. And then we continue. Just a couple of days ago, here where I live in Rome, in my apartment building, we did not have water for 2 or 3 hours. And in the chat that people used, everybody was saying, "What are we gonna do? We need to fill our buckets with water." And I'm like, "Oh my goodness, this is not normal. You just don't have don't have water for 2 or 3 hours, and this is such a big deal for you." I mean, in Ukraine, people don't have electricity for days in such horrible temperatures, and they're able to resist. They're able to function. Life goes on. Life goes on.
Has it produced tension, or is it producing people's being much more unified together?
Tensions, in a way, yes, but more unity. Because whenever there is a problem, Ukrainians always get together. They help each other. So actually, this spirit of civil society, the spirit of togetherness, the spirit of unity, of solidarity, because solidarity is not just an abstract concept. We can talk about solidarity, but unless you practice it, it doesn't make sense. So yes, you see a lot of these moments of unification and solidarity, and this is so much needed in the times like these, tragic times in Ukraine.
Well, let's talk about the language and history and culture in terms of shaping the nation's resilience. How important have these aspects been in giving Ukrainians real resilience? Is there kind of a rediscovery of your literature and music? Is that something I think of the choral festivals up in the Baltics as a way of having given people in Latvia and Estonia, Lithuania, a real sense of cultural identity and expressing themselves in their own language, which was part of the pushback right at the end of the 80s that led to the downfall of communism in their country. How important is this cultural side for Ukraine right now?
Definitely, since the full-scale invasion, Ukrainians began to, in a way, rediscover their cultural identity. And culture as religion, both of them are very important sources for strength, for resilience, and they're backbone of the identity. I mean, without cultural identity, I mean, you don't know who you are, right? For years, I've been working in the field of intercultural, interfaith dialogue. And the first question we ask when we start our dialogue sessions is, what do you bring to the table? You always bring your identity, who you are. And unless you don't know who you are, you cannot dialogue authentically. You cannot have authentic dialogue. So yes, culture has been rediscovered. And what I notice now is that there's so many young Ukrainians who are so professional and talented, and we have so much great songs, great music, and all in Ukrainian. And even the singers who were singing in other languages like Russian in the past, now they changed to the Ukrainian language. So that's an important aspect, right, of the shift that you can see in the society. People are rediscovering poets, literature, music is very important, and also the church. The church has played a lot of important roles in helping people rediscover this identity, because a lot of what the church is doing, it's educational. And of course, education is essential. I mean, without education, you cannot get anywhere. So we understand that culture, education, and religion, they are important elements of shaping our identity. And without them, you cannot go forward.
Now, you talked about Lviv as being a place with many different cultures. So how can this be inclusive and not develop tribalism within the same region?
Right. For me, I mean, diversity is always a richness. I remember in the past years, especially before the war, I attended a lot of these forums on inclusion in Western countries, also in North America, and it was so frustrating sometimes. When you have a forum on inclusion and you try to bring a religious voice into that forum, and they would say, "Oh no, we don't want to talk about religion." And it's like, come on, how inclusive are you if you're not including a religious voice? That doesn't make sense at all. And for them, it's sort of, I don't know, it's hard to understand that religion is part of society. And for the Ukrainians, thankfully, we don't exclude a religion from the inclusive discourse, right? But also, as we said, we have different cultures represented. We have Polish, we have Jewish. I mean, Lviv, until the Second World War, was third of the population was Jewish, right? So we have a lot of Jewish neighbors. We had synagogues in the city. Now we have cultural Islamic centers. So this is very important. But again, the public discourse and both educational institutions, they have to provide education to young people so they are educated in the right kind of inclusion that does not exclude, that actually includes the authentic inclusion.
So you're modeling this sense of solidarity, unity with diversity, which of course is the EU's motto. But these days there's lots of we're seeing European society being so fragmented and polarized. This is something we can learn from Ukrainians. In terms of moral clarity as well, what can we as Europeans learn from Ukrainians? It seems like you've been so your sense of clarity, moral clarity, has been so heightened by this aggression, and yet there seems to be a lot of moral ambiguity reflected in a lot of leadership from the West, particularly from America, which has been a huge disappointment, I'm sure, for all of Ukraine to see the country that in the past has been known to be the leader of the free world displaying such moral ambiguity.
Definitely. I mean, for the Ukrainians, this war is not just about territories. It's not about, resources, which are so important too. I mean, for the economy, without them, you cannot build strong economy, right? I mean, without a territory, without having your resources, access to them. But for us, it's not just about territory or resources. It's about, there is something more at stake. First of all, there is freedom at stake, right? So we have that moral clarity that we are fighting this existential war. It's not just, again, the war with tanks, but it's war with ideas and for against this ideology of the Russian world, Ruski Mir, right, which tries to impose their way of thinking, totalitarian thinking on the people. So for the Ukrainians, it's crystal clear. We are fighting this war for our existence, for our identity, and this is evil. And a lot of what Russia has done, this is just pure evil. In the first days of the war, think of Bucha, Mariupol, what we saw in the TV, it's hell on earth. It's pure evil. So Ukrainians are fighting that, and we know what we are fighting for. What are Russians fighting for? I don't know, just invading and killing. So this is a big problem. And thanks God, Ukrainians have that moral clarity. And of course, if you're talking about freedom, going back to our discussion, freedom always, it's about morality. It's about the choice, right? So freedom is so important. And when we are free, we're actually able to make these choices, and we can discern what is right and what is good.
Yeah. How personally, how do you feel? How have you felt about seeing how the world has responded over these 4 years?
Well, in the beginning, I have so many. I was in Lviv when the war started, and there was so much. Again, message. I received so many messages, right, from the friends of mine. I went on different. I did a lot of interviews for a lot of Catholic media, especially. So there was a lot of solidarity that we saw from the European states. I mean, the borders were open, right? I mean, Poland accepted millions of Ukrainians over the course of a couple of months. Some countries, then they even, invited Ukrainians without a visa to come, like Northern Ireland, for example, right? So no visa for the Ukrainians. People were put in schools. I had so many messages of people telling me, come and we can host you at our home. And this is what happened. People were hosted. So the response was good from the people. Unfortunately, we did not have a decisive, how would I say, response from the states, from the governments. Until today, we receive help, but it's not enough. It's just enough to sort of defend ourselves. But the spirit of Ukrainians is going down. We cannot have that resilience forever. So it is frustrating for many Ukrainians.
And of course, it's highly ironic that now the Trump administration is asking help from Ukraine of shooting down the Iranian weapons, and yet having cut off the military support. So, yeah.
And just today, this morning, I read, sorry to interrupt you, that in the past 4 days or something, U.S. has spent more money or these defense aerial systems than Ukraine in the past 4 years, defending itself from Russia, which is crazy. I mean, if you think about the scale.
Yeah. I saw a quote from Zelensky where he said there'd been 300 Patriot rockets being fired off, which is more than Ukraine has had available in the whole war. And yeah. So this moral clarity is obviously something I think we in the West need to learn from Ukrainians. But we haven't been, our sense of moral discernment, of course, has been very, very blunted by the banishment of the faith communities from the public square through an exclusive secularism. But fortunately, it seems like we're moving on from that. There is a recognition for the need for the faith community's voice to be heard in the public square. And yet we're rather flabby in terms of our moral muscles, shall we say, how to use them, whereas this has been a desperate struggle of life and death for Ukrainians, and how we need to learn about hope and courage under pressure. Perhaps this, one of the most striking lessons is the psychological and spiritual resilience of the Ukrainians. Where does that come from?
When the war started in Ukraine, before this full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia, I worked for about 10 years in the field of interreligious dialogue. So I founded a center, and most of our work has been academic. So we organized various academic talks, seminars, workshops for the priests, seminarians, and the representatives of different religious communities. But when the war started, the full-scale invasion started, you cannot just pretend nothing's going on and you continue with your academic talks. Of course, that continued later, right? But right when the war starts, when the bombs are falling on you, how do you dialogue? What do you dialogue about? We often say that dialogue is about safe space, but what if there is no safe space, right? Where do you find it? What do you do about it? So one of the things we started to do with the Libertas Center that I founded and that we have a team still in Lviv was a program called Interfaith Rehab Program Restart. So what we did, we brought people from heavily afflicted areas like the east of Ukraine or Kyiv or Odessa, and those people either lost their relatives or they lost their homes. So they went under something very tragic. They experienced a lot of trauma. So we brought about 40 people to a nice retreat center in a monastery, and we had a lot of young people there. So what we did during this project, this initiative, we used spirituality from different faith communities like liturgical chant, iconography, praying together, meditation. So we used that to alleviate the sufferings of the people and to help them deal with the trauma. And I will never forget what I heard from young people after 1 week of spending with them after this project in Ukraine. They came to me and they told me, Taras, there is so much hatred towards Russia. There is so much hatred towards everything which is Russian, but we understand that hatred is not the way to go because hatred eats us from within. And I was wondering, is it this spiritualities that we used. Is this concept of forgiveness that we have in religion that helps people understand that hatred is not the way to go? Yes, hatred is a natural reaction to somebody that tries to kill you, right? You defend your life, it's instinctively. But then as you rationalize it, as you try to understand what's going on, you understand that you cannot have the same attitude as the one who is trying to destroy you, right? So they said hatred is not a way to go. Definitely love, not yet, because we cannot say we love our enemies, right? But hatred is not the way to go. We still don't have the recipe of how we're going to deal with all of this trauma, with all of this tragedy, because it will take generations, I'm sure. But hearing these words from young people and the people who experienced so much tragedy in their lives, it was not only uplifting, but it was just mind-blowing to me to hear that.
Well, what you're touching on there is something that looms huge in the future. Somehow, I mean, this is going to affect relationships between Russia and Ukraine for generations to come. And of course, this was none of us, or very few of us, have living memory of the attitude that the Dutch and the French and the British may have had towards the Germans as well. But the whole process of forgiveness and reconciliation that did take place after the war, and Schuman was a very key figure in all of that, points to a long road ahead in Ukraine. How can you see that unfolding?
Oftentimes we talk about hope as a theological virtue together with faith, hope, and love, right? But I mean, hope is becoming something also political. It's not just, naive optimism. You're not optimistic about the future because somebody will come and help you. But hope is also an action. You act, you fight for your freedom. And this is what we've seen that Ukrainians have been doing for years now, right? I mean, they're on the front line, and it's about their existence. It's something existential, and it's fight against evil. I'm sure this is not just, fighting with tanks or drones, but there is evil. And, from the very beginnings, again, I'm a Christian, so I always put that Christian hat on myself. I believe that God and the good will prevail at the end, right? So that's what gives us the strength. And actually, one of the leaders of the Ukrainian nations who needs to be rediscovered today more and more so, Andrei Sheptytsky, he said that the measure of a nation's strength is the moral strength of its people. And I think having built that character, thank you for that slide, having built that character, that moral character in the DNA of Ukrainians, we can achieve so much. And this is what we can actually offer to Europe, because we are fighting also for the European values. We are fighting to be part of Europe, to have that European identity, and this is two ways. So we bring something to Europe, but also we are inspired by this European community, by having so many different cultures, mentalities coexisting and cooperating and working in peace.
Ukrainians are showing us that freedom and faith really belong together. And can you comment on the thought that perhaps Ukraine is going to show moral leadership for a renewed Europe? I mean, in many areas, when President Zelensky stood firm right at the start of the invasion, he was showing moral leadership that no other leader in Europe was showing, and continues to show. He's under strong pressure to simply do a deal and to give up some land for the sake of peace. Well, he knows that there's no moral foundation for that kind of peace, which is just appeasement and it's a short-term thing. Could you see Ukraine actually becoming recognized by other nations as showing a way forward to renewal, moral renewal? Because I think one of the statements that Sheptytsky has also said is that the rebuilding of a nation begins with moral renewal.
Mm-hmm. Yes, very good, excellent question. Yes, we are suffering a lot, right? I mean, Ukraine has been invaded. There's so much tragedy, so much bloodshed now. but also we can't be too romantic, right? I mean, there is still corruption, there are still issues in Ukraine, right? And unfortunately, this is still part of that post-Soviet mentality, right?
Yeah.
So yes, we can see that corruption also on local level, and unfortunately, corruption became so much part of the people's lives and a way of living that this is one of the issues that we still have to sort of cope with, to deal with. And I always believe that it's religious communities and churches who can be these moral compasses. For a number of years, I worked for the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and we had a lot of businesses, banks, and entrepreneurs coming to the chamber. And what we started to do with them, we started to give them these spiritual retreats talking about the evil of corruption, prosperity. So it changed their mind of thinking. They thought, oh, I thought corruption is a sin. It's just a social construct, but actually it is sin. You need to go to confession, and then you need to make amends for if you're part of the corruption system. But seeing what Ukraine is doing under these circumstances, definitely this moral character is being developed. It's being strengthened, as we see it on the example of our president. To be honest, I didn't vote for Zelensky, but as the war started, and as he grew himself as a person and as a leader, that shows you that can be done. A nation can actually overcome issues if there's unity in society and if there's political will as well, because they go together.
Yeah. What will need to happen even before the war ends to really strengthen the spiritual and moral foundations in Ukraine? And could it be that Ukraine becomes a kind of a laboratory for other nations to realize how they can stir moral renewal in their own country? I think we're talking here about something that we often talk about the soul of Europe or the soul of our nation, but we're talking about how can the soul of Ukraine be revived? What elements would you see necessary for that?
Mm-hmm. First of all, we need help from the West, right? I mean, we are running out of resources. We are running out of people, which is the biggest resource, right? I mean, we'll always rebuild infrastructure. We'll rebuild the roads, airports. We can never return to human life. So this is tragedy, and that will be with us, right? So we need to undergo this process, right, of healing, right? And this process of healing cannot help on its own, right? We need to have civil society, the state, religious communities working together towards this healing the wounds, because right now they're bleeding, right? Then we need help from the West. I mean, if the West really understands that we are fighting for their freedom as well, right? I mean, then we'll be more faster on this way towards victory, right? We don't want any type of peace, but we want peace which is just. Because let's say we give up our territories now, and this is problematic because I'm sure that Russia will build military bases there, what they did in Crimea, and in a few years' time, you're going to see worse things that we are seeing now, right? I mean, Europe will be in danger. So this is a very serious thing, and I hope Europeans realize that. And I think from the 2 years that I've been living now in Italy, Italians are also realizing that, because in the beginning, when I arrived, they said, "Why don't you just give up, the territories, and there will be peace?" And I said, "You don't understand. It's not about territory only. There is much more to that." And I just hope that Europeans have that realization and understanding of the context, because this is so important.
Well, Taras, this has been very, very helpful, and I hope that we do really take to heart what Ukrainians can teach us right now. If I try to summarize some of the points you've been making about freedom, really needs to be defended. It just does not happen automatically, and I think we are in acute danger in the West of having forgotten that, because we've just taken it for granted. How important national identity is, even as we move towards unity within Europe, it's still with the diversity of the different national cultures and national identities. And there's a positive form of patriotism that's not exclusive or built on ethnic purity. And you demonstrated that very much, even in the city of Lviv. How that civil society really is the backbone of resilience, and that there needs to be this bottom-up engagement, not just waiting for the government to take initiative, but civil society, all sorts of associations and organizations, and the churches play a very key role in all of that. You talked about the fact that culture really matters, that language and memory and faith and tradition are not just relics of the past, but they're sources of national resilience. And you've talked about some of the sources of these resilience from theologians like Sheptytsky, that truth matters. Would you like to say something a bit more about that? How important is truth?
Definitely. When the pandemic started, the COVID pandemic a couple of years ago, right, it seemed that we are not only in the pandemic, but infodemic, because there were so many conspiracy theories. I mean, there are so many fake news and propaganda in the media. And, for sometimes now, being in Rome, I also work in the Vatican. I bring different people to see the Vatican. And what strikes me now is that when I start talking about history and I give them objective facts, a lot of people say, oh, we don't want that. We want theories, conspiracy theories. We want gossips. And it strikes me that there is this demand on the part of the people that they're not interested in truth. They are more willing to listen to conspiracy theories. This is something that turns them on. And this is extremely dangerous, right? Because people don't realize that we are moving away from the truth. And truth is fundamental. Jesus, again, going back to religion, Jesus said, seek the truth and the truth will make you free, right? So truth and freedom, they're interconnected. Freedom has this moral dimension. Unless we are in the paradigm of truth, I mean, it's not working, right? It's not working. So truth is fundamental. And without truth, we cannot move forward as well. Justice without freedom. We cannot discern then what is true, what is right.
Thank you. And it seems like one of the lessons you've been talking about is that hope actually becomes a political force, and to keep hope alive in Ukraine, by educating the children as well, and creating art, celebrating life in the midst of the oppression. You're demonstrating different ways of doing that. We see clips of people dancing and singing in the bomb shelters and so forth. And but also that we understand that your struggle is not just Ukraine's struggle. It's fighting really for Europe's future as a whole. You're holding up a mirror to Europe, and in this way, as Ukraine rediscovers its own soul, you can help us find the soul of Europe as well. Do you have any last thoughts you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, I would just ask people, to continue praying for Ukraine, to continue not forgetting us, because we are there and we'll be there, I'm sure. I mean, the good will prevail. So let's have this solidarity, not as abstract, but something very concrete. Remember that freedom is something that needs to be cultivated. Don't take it for granted, because only when we are free, we can become prosperous. We can become truly who we are, the image and likeness of God.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Taras. We continue to pray regularly and try to bring encouragement to the Ukrainian people. Thank you for the work you're doing in speaking up for truth and bringing moral clarity. Thank you very much
for hosting me. Thank you. God bless.
Okay.